Chapter 11 of Tractate Menachos covers the laws of the 2 loaves in the temple showbread. The first Mishnah says, the 2 loaves are kneaded one at a time and baked one at a time. The showbread loaves are kneaded one at a time, but baked together. They would be placed into a mold to bake, and after they were done, they were placed into another mold, so that way they retained their shape. The Gemara sources this principle that the loaves were kneaded one at a time, quoting verses. The reason a second mold was used for these, as opposed to just being kept in the original mold, was because they expanded, so they would need a larger mold. Okay, on the actual shape of the showbread, it was very unique. Some say it was shaped like an open box with 2 walls, like so. Others say it was shaped like a ship, circular, and tapering off to points at the ends. According to the first opinion, the spoons were just placed inside. According to the second opinion, the spoons were placed in a hollowed-out flat area in the wall. Also, according to the first opinion, the golden rods would be placed across, and according to the second opinion, there would be protrusions made for the rods. Also, according to the second opinion, the props underneath would have to be semicircle shaped to hold them. They were needed to support the weight of the bread. The one who says the breads were shaped like a ship would also say the props were placed on the table, while the one who said it was a box would say it was placed on the ground. There's a statement that the bread and props support each other, which would be more in accordance with the second opinion. One case is cited which seems to imply the bread was shaped like a ship, like the second opinion. It's a dispute by the Jewish people wandering in the desert if there was liability for taking the showbread outside of the tabernacle courtyard area. That's disputed based on a few verses. As to if this offering is comparable to the other types of sacrificial offerings by the tabernacle, there's related principles on when and where lepers or people with corpse impurity would be banished from that area. New Mishnah. The 2 loaves and the showbread could both be kneaded and shaped outside the temple courtyard, but they must be baked inside the courtyard. Their baking does not override the Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says that the whole process must be done inside the courtyard. Rabbi Shimon says that the whole process can be prepared and baked outside of the courtyard. The Gemara says the fact that the first opinion says that the shaping and kneading can be done outside the temple courtyard, but the baking must be done inside, seemingly disputes within itself as to whether a measure for solid foods is sanctified or not. That's explained that the Isarin measure does not consecrate, but the oven does. Another question, if the oven consecrated the bread, then why can't it override the Shabbos? So it's explained that actually that doesn't make sense, it's an error. The opinion that holds that the baking of the showbread does not override the Shabbos would also hold that the oven does not sanctify it. Anyways, there was a dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon as to what's allowed to be done outside the temple courtyard. This is possibly based on verses, which are then brought and discussed, although it concludes it's based on tradition. New Mishnah. By the mincha offering of the Kohen Gadol, its kneading, shaping, and baking must be done inside the temple courtyard, and it overrides the Shabbos. The grinding and sifting of its flour does not override the Shabbos. This is as Rabbi Akiva ruled, that any work that can be done before Shabbos does not override the Shabbos, but if it must be done on the Shabbos, then it would. By all other mincha offerings, their kneading and shaping must be done in a vessel in the temple courtyard, and the procedures cannot be done outside. Some measurements by the 2 loaves, they were 7 by 4 handbreadths, and their sides extended upwards 4 finger breadths, like this. The showbread was 10 by 5 handbreadths, and their sides extended up 7 finger breadths. It's said that the showbread was called the lechem hapanim, the bread of faces, as it had many surfaces. Rabbi Yehuda says the shulchan, the table, was 10 by 5 handbreadths. The showbread was also 10 by 5 handbreadths, but it was placed sideways, with the longer length across the table's shorter width, and it was then folded upwards on both sides, like so 2.5 handbreadths less on either side. Rabbi Meir disagrees. He says the table was 12 by 6 handbreadths, while the panim bread was 10 by 5. It's then placed on sideways, but with 2 handbreadths on either side folded up, which would leave a space in the middle for air to flow through. It's disputed as to if the frankincense spoons were placed in that area. There were essentially 4 shelves on the shulchan, 2 for each arrangement, with 28 rows extending across, 14 for each arrangement. The arrangement of the rods and their removal does not override the Shabbos. That's all done beforehand. Also, all of the utensils placed in the temple were placed with their length according to the length of the sanctuary, so facing east and west. The Gemara sources these principles and measurements. The rods did not add to the height as they sunk into the bread. The purpose of them was to separate the breads to allow airflow in between to prevent mold. Also, the extended bits of the loaves didn't add to their height as they were folded inwards as visualized. The breads did not rest on top of the frame around the table, they went inside of it, so that way it wouldn't mess with the height total. Some actually just say that the frame was on the bottom of the table, and there's some related discussion on principles of utensil impurity as to whether the shulchan table was susceptible to impurity. It also spends some time sourcing the concepts that the temple shulchan had these shelves and rods, and additionally describes their features and placement. A related dispute, some say all cubit measurements in the temple had the cubit measurement of 6 handbreadths, while the golden indoor altar had cubit measurements of 5 handbreadths. Others say it was the utensils that used the 5 handbreadth cubit measurement. They dispute the sources for this, and additionally on the measurements of the indoor golden altar based on a whole bunch of verses and related discussions across the Gemara regarding the point where the red line was drawn and similar. It also spends some time describing the measurements of the outdoor altar, although this will be described more in a later tractate, Tractate Midas. It also sources the principle that there could be differing cubit measurements. Somewhat related, it mentions that the east gate of the temple had an image of the capital city of Persia engraved into it. Some say to remind people of their prior exiles in that region, others say it's to make people have respect of the Persian royalty, and it also says that one should always have great respect for royalty. And there's some related discussion on the times of Mashiach, as it said a spring of water will issue forth from the third temple, and some say the trees grown from it will cure mute, others say it will make women no longer barren. It additionally discusses the arrangements of the loaves of the shulchan table and sources the principle that the utensils were all facing east to west, as were also the poles of the ark inside the temple. It spends some time describing all of the tables and menorahs that King Solomon made for the temple, and additionally where they were all placed, in which direction they were facing, which was said to be on this east to west axis. There's some dispute as to how the menorah was placed and how the tables were placed in relationship to one another. It additionally describes this arrangement along with some sources. Some related teachings, it said that there are times when stopping to study Torah itself is a good thing, like to accompany a bride to her wedding and related. It's also said that if a Torah scholar sins, it's wrong to publicly shame him. And also if somebody causes even a word of his Torah study to be forgotten, that's transgressing a prohibition. Some say it's 2 prohibitions, some say it's actually 3. This is if the forgetting was intentional due to acts of laziness, and it was within his grasp for this to not occur. Related, it said that the Torah was given in 40 days and that the soul was created in 40 days, which shows that if somebody safeguards the Torah, his soul will be safeguarded. New Mishnah. There were 2 tables within the temple antechamber by the doorway of the temple, one of marble and one of gold. The Kohanim would place the showbread on the marble one when entering and on the gold one when leaving, as we never descend in sacred matters. There was a gold table inside the actual sanctuary where the showbread would always rest on. 4 Kohanim would enter, 2 with 2 stacks of bread, 2 with 2 spoons of frankincense, and 4 other Kohanim with them, 2 to remove the breads and 2 to remove the frankincense. The Kohanim bringing the breads and frankincense would stand by the north side of the table, facing south, while the Kohanim removing these items would stand in the south side, facing north. As the second Kohanim would remove the prior week's bread, the new Kohanim would put the new ones within a gap of a handbreadth, as there can't be any bread missing on that table for even a moment. Some say it's fine if they're removed fully and then the new ones are placed. They exited the sanctuary, the old bread was placed on the antechamber's golden table, the frankincense spoons were then burned, and the breads were eaten by the Kohanim. If Yom Kippur falls out on a Shabbos, the loaves would be eaten that evening. Also, if Yom Kippur falls out the day before Shabbos, the Yom Kippur goat offering would be eaten Friday night, although it said the Babylonians would just eat it raw, which wasn't really proper. The Gemara says, related to this concept that the breads should be swapped out without a gap in between, it speaks on the importance of learning Torah all day and all night. Some say it's sufficient to learn just a chapter in the morning and in the afternoon. Some say it's sufficient to say the Shema in the morning and in the afternoon. That's discussed further, and it explains the great reward for learning and studying Torah and the penalty for not doing so. When it said the Babylonians ate the Yom Kippur goat raw, that actually meant the people of Alexandria in Egypt, but the people writing this just called them Babylonians because they did not think very much of the Jewish people of Babylonia. New Mishnah. If somebody impermissibly arranged the showbread on Shabbos and the frankincense the day after, and then burnt the frankincense the next Shabbos, the loaves are invalid, so there would be no liability for improper intent, for leftovers, or impurity. If somebody arranged the loaves and frankincense on Shabbos and then burned the frankincense the next day on Sunday, again, the breads are invalid, but there's no liability for improper intent, leftovers, or impurity. If somebody arranged the loaves and frankincense on Sunday, the bread would be invalid. Instead, they should be left until the coming Shabbos, as it's fine if they're left out there for a while. The Gemara mentions some principles of the temple service, which is that the morning offering had to be offered at dawn, so they'd check and declare if the eastern sky had lit up sufficiently. If the morning offering was brought too early, it would be invalid, and it would be taken to the place of burning. Essentially, this establishes that a daytime offering cannot be sanctified at night. However, it is added that it can be sanctified to become invalid, which is why a kaimetz offering cannot be removed too early the prior night and then returned. However, our Mishnah said that the showbread, if offered on a Sunday, can be left all week towards the next Shabbos to become valid, so that's seemingly contradictory. So it's explained possibly that as the placement here was actually premature, unlike by doing it at night, the table gives no sanctity to the bread, so it's not then invalidated. This would mean that the Cohen either removed the bread from the table before Friday night, or it's just that it wouldn't matter if it was left there on Friday night, as it was placed on the wrong day anyways. New Mishnah. The 2 loaves offering is eaten either 2 days or 3 days after it's made. This is as they're baked the day before they're eaten on the holiday of Shavuos, so they're eaten on the holiday 2 days after. And if the holiday falls out on a Sunday, they're made on Friday, so they would be eaten 3 days after. The showbread is eaten either 9, 10, or 11 days after it's baked. It's typically made the day before Shabbos, so it's eaten on the next Shabbos, which is 9 days after. If there's a holiday on the day before Shabbos, it would be made on Thursday and eaten on the next Shabbos, so 10 days after. If there's a 2-day holiday like Rosh Hashanah that falls out on Thursday and Friday, it would be made on Wednesday, so it would end up being eaten 11 days after. This is as the baking of the showbread does not override Shabbos or holidays, and others say it does override holidays, just not the holiday of Yom Kippur. The Gemara says there's an opinion that vowed and donated offerings aren't brought on holidays according to biblical law. As we said, the 2 loaves of Shavuot do not override Shabbos or holidays, so the same would apply to these other types of offerings. And that's the end of chapter 11.